Hydrogen has become one of the most discussed elements of the global energy transition. Over the past decade, it has been presented as a pathway to decarbonize sectors that are difficult to electrify directly, including heavy industry, long-distance transport, and certain forms of energy storage. Governments have released national hydrogen strategies, companies have announced large project pipelines, and expectations around low-emissions hydrogen have risen steadily. The Global Hydrogen Review 2024 and Global Hydrogen Review 2025, published by the International Energy Agency, provide a grounded assessment of how this transition is progressing in practice. Read together, these two reports do not reject hydrogen's role in the energy system. Instead, they document a clear recalibration of expectations. Progress is real, but it is slower, more uneven, and more constrained by practical factors than early narratives suggested. Both reviews confirm that global hydrogen demand remains substantial. In 2023, global demand was approximately 97 million tons, and it increased further in 2024 to nearly 100 million tons. This growth, however, continues to be driven overwhelmingly by traditional uses. Oil refining and chemical production account for the majority of hydrogen consumption worldwide, and this structure has remained largely unchanged between the two reporting periods. New applications for hydrogen, including low-emissions uses in transport, power generation, and new industrial processes, remain limited in scale. While these applications are growing from a low base, they still represent only a very small share of total hydrogen demand. The reports do not suggest a rapid shift away from this structure in the near term, highlighting that hydrogen's existing role in industry continues to dominate the market. Low-emissions hydrogen remains a very small portion of total global production. Both the 2024 and 2025 reviews indicate that hydrogen produced using renewable electricity or fossil fuels with carbon capture represents less than 1% of current output. Although production of low-emissions hydrogen is increasing, the pace of growth remains modest relative to overall hydrogen demand and relative to earlier expectations embedded in many national strategies. One of the most consistent findings across both reviews is the gap between announced hydrogen projects and those that advance to a final investment decision. The 2024 review documents a large global pipeline of announced projects, particularly in relation to electrolyser capacity. Hundreds of gigawatts of capacity have been proposed worldwide. However, only a small fraction of these projects had reached final investment decision or entered construction at the time of reporting. The 2025 review confirms that this gap persists. In some regions, the number of projects expected to come online by 2030 has declined due to cancellations, delays, or changes in project scope. This has led to a downward revision in expected low-emissions hydrogen production by the end of the decade. Based on updated assessments of project maturity, the 2025 review indicates that potential production from announced projects fell from earlier estimates of around 49 million tons per year to approximately 37 million tons per year. Projects that have reached final investment decision or are under construction would contribute only a portion of this revised total. This adjustment does not reflect a loss of interest in hydrogen, but rather a reassessment based on which projects have progressed beyond early development stages. The reviews place increasing emphasis on distinguishing between announced capacity and capacity that is likely to be realized within the stated timeframe. Electrolyser manufacturing capacity has expanded rapidly over the past 2 years. The 2024 review notes a significant increase in global manufacturing capacity, supported by scale-up in several regions, including China. By the time of the 2025 review, manufacturing capacity had continued to grow, and the reports indicate that availability of electrolyzers is not currently a binding constraint on deployment. At the same time, the reviews observe that much of this manufacturing capacity remains underutilized. This reflects the slower pace of project development rather than a lack of technological readiness. The reports therefore highlight a disconnect between component supply and project execution, without attributing this gap to a single cause. Cost remains a central issue throughout both reviews. The reports confirm that costs for renewable electricity and electrolyzers have declined in recent years, driven by technological improvements and scale effects. However, they also emphasize that low-emissions hydrogen remains more expensive than hydrogen produced from unabated fossil fuels in most regions. The reviews do not present a single global cost figure, recognizing that costs vary significantly by region and project configuration. Instead, they consistently identify cost competitiveness as a major barrier to wider adoption. In the absence of strong policy support, carbon pricing, or other incentives, low-emissions hydrogen struggles to compete with established alternatives. Infrastructure development is repeatedly identified as a critical challenge. Large-scale hydrogen production requires reliable access to electricity, adequate water supply, storage facilities, and transport infrastructure such as pipelines, ports, and terminals. Both reviews note that infrastructure planning and development have not kept pace with project announcements. In many cases, supporting infrastructure remains at early planning stages, contributing to uncertainty around project timelines and costs. The reports highlight the importance of coordinated infrastructure development, but do not prescribe specific solutions, reflecting the diversity of national contexts and regulatory environments. Demand uncertainty is another recurring theme. While interest in hydrogen is growing across multiple sectors, long-term offtake agreements remain limited. The 2025 review notes that the pace of new offtake agreements slowed in 2024 compared with earlier periods. This creates challenges for project developers, as long-term revenue certainty is often required to secure financing for capital-intensive facilities. Policy frameworks continue to play a central role in shaping hydrogen development. Both reviews document a growing number of hydrogen strategies, incentives, and regulatory initiatives across major economies. These policies signal long-term intent and provide a foundation for market development. However, the 2025 review places greater emphasis on the need for policies to translate ambition into implementation. Stable regulatory frameworks, demand-side support, and coordination across sectors are highlighted as important conditions for sustained investment. The reviews do not suggest that policy alone can resolve all challenges, but they identify policy consistency and clarity as necessary elements for progress. Geographical differences in hydrogen deployment are becoming more pronounced. The reports observe that progress varies widely by region, influenced by differences in industrial structure, policy support, infrastructure readiness, and access to finance. Some regions have advanced project pipelines and clearer regulatory environments, while others face greater difficulty moving from planning to construction. The 2025 review reflects a noticeable shift in tone toward greater realism. Rather than focusing primarily on announced capacity, it places more weight on projects that have reached advanced stages of development. This approach provides a more conservative but clearer picture of near-term production potential and highlights the importance of execution over aspiration. Environmental and social considerations are acknowledged as part of project development. Issues related to water use, land availability, and community engagement are recognized as factors that can influence project acceptance and timelines. While these aspects are not quantified in detail, the reports note their relevance to project development and long-term viability. Taken together, the Global Hydrogen Review 2024 and 2025 present a consistent narrative. Hydrogen continues to attract strong interest and policy attention. Technological capability and manufacturing capacity have improved. At the same time, deployment of low-emissions hydrogen remains limited, and progress toward large-scale implementation has been slower than originally anticipated. The challenges identified are not framed as failures of technology, but as barriers related to project execution, infrastructure availability, demand certainty, and cost competitiveness. These barriers have contributed to delays, cancellations, and revisions to near-term outlooks. The reports emphasize the need for coordinated action across policy, industry, and finance to address these issues. For stakeholders involved in hydrogen development, the implications are clear. Future progress will depend less on announcing new strategies or capacity targets, and more on advancing projects through final investment decision and into operation. This requires alignment between supply and demand, timely infrastructure development, and policy environments that reduce investment risk. The reviews do not suggest that hydrogen's role in the energy transition is diminishing. Rather, they indicate that expectations are being recalibrated to reflect practical constraints. Hydrogen development is entering a phase where delivery and implementation matter more than scale of ambition. For professionals seeking to understand how hydrogen projects move from concept to operation, execution-focused platforms such as H2 Hub by Renee Energy focus on translating high-level strategies into practical project considerations. In parallel, structured project finance models are increasingly used to assess feasibility, sensitivity, and risk under realistic assumptions. The revised outlook presented in the 2025 review reflects a maturing market rather than a retreat. As projects advance or stall, expectations are adjusted based on experience. This process is shaping a hydrogen sector that may be smaller in the near term than early projections suggested, but potentially more robust and credible over time. The central conclusion supported by both reports is straightforward. Hydrogen deployment is progressing, but slowly and unevenly. Achieving scale will require sustained effort to address cost, infrastructure, demand, and policy challenges. The pace of transition will be determined not by the number of strategies published, but by the number of projects that reach operation.